Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Friday, the 6th of December in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Paris, where Emmanuel Macron is vowing to stay on as French president amid ongoing political turmoil. As he remains defiant, the far-right leader Marine Le Pen has told Bloomberg she's ready to negotiate if the president gives ground.
And in other news, police widen the manhunt for the killer of insurance chief Brian Thompson as the words delay and depose are found on recovered bullets. Plus, living beyond your means, the CBI says UK household incomes will be held back by October's tax hikes in more bad news for Starmer. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
France's President Emmanuel Macron says he will serve out the remainder of his term in office and appoint a new Prime Minister in the coming days. In a nationally televised address, Macron appeared determined after Marine Le Pen's far-right party joined forces with a left-wing alliance to topple his government.
National Rally MPs chose to vote against the government with a text that contradicted their own platform and was an insult to their own voters. By doing so, they chose chaos, and that's the only project they share with the radical left. This with the support of the rest of the left-wing alliance. Not to do, but to undo, to wreak havoc.
Macron's speech came just 24 hours after Prime Minister Michel Barnier was evicted from office in a no-confidence vote over his plans for vast spending cuts and tax increases to repair gaping holes in public finances. One of the architects of that vote, National Rally leader Marine Le Pen, has told Bloomberg that France can deliver a budget in a matter of weeks if the next Prime Minister is willing to narrow the deficit more slowly.
Getting to 3% in 2029, I don't think it's credible, but I'm not the only one. I don't think it's credible either to the President of the Cour des Comptes. Once again, these are simply promises, and they know very well they can't keep to them. Mr. Barnier made this promise, and in reality, his budget worsened the deficit by 12 billion. So if we don't make significant, intelligent structural savings with regard to the state, and if we don't put in place the conditions so that companies can work, invest without being suffocated with extra taxes, we won't get there. But with these two solutions, we can succeed as quickly as possible to get back to a reasonable deficit, even if the 3% was just decided on the back of an envelope.
How fast could that be? C'est l'affaire de quelques semaines.
Well, it's a matter of a few weeks. We'll discuss it with the new Prime Minister. We'll work together. We'll explain what our red lines are. Our red lines are we can't ask the French people to pay the bill for the mistakes of their leaders. That's what Mr. Barnier did. He massively increases taxes, he hits sick people, retired people, he hits everyone. And at the same time, once again, there's zero savings from the state. That's inadmissible.
French bonds gained after Le Pen spoke to Bloomberg and the spread over German bunds tightened. France's budget deficit is expected to widen to more than 6% of GDP this year, double what's allowed under EU rules.
Now to other news. The words delay and depose were written on shell casings and a live round recovered in front of the New York hotel where UnitedHealth boss Brian Thompson was fatally shot. The inscriptions loosely echo a book titled Delay, Deny, Defend, which describes tactics allegedly used by insurers to deny health insurance claims. New York Police Department yesterday released a series of photos of the suspect and appealed to the public for help in identifying the person who does remain at large. Here is the former NYPD Chief of Detectives, Bob Boyce.
The number one primary thing right now is identify him and then apprehend him. And the motive comes a little bit after that. So there's two pursuits here.
Bob Boyce speaking there. The shooting captured on security video showed the attacker waiting for Brian Thompson upon his arrival at the hotel. The perpetrator approached the executive from behind and shot him multiple times.
Household incomes in the UK will be held back by recent government tax hikes. That's according to new forecasts from the Confederation of British Industry. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister delivered his plan for change in a key speech outlining, amongst others, his ambition to raise living standards in every part of the UK. But according to the CBI, that goal will be hindered by his own legislation. The group says living standards will improve, but at a slower rate than previously thought, as firms pass on tax increases through higher prices and slower wage growth. The downgrade comes after Chancellor Rachel Reeves raised taxes by £40 billion a year in her October budget. It chimes with recent analysis from the Bank of England suggesting households will see finances squeezed by high borrowing costs for the foreseeable future, with policymaker Megan Green warning it will take time for consumer spending to recover due to elevated mortgage costs. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Now to some deals news. Aviva is said to be nearing a deal to acquire Direct Line after upping its offer for the company. Bloomberg understands that during the latest negotiations, Aviva further sweetened its offer, which had already been increased to £3.4 billion. Direct Line may announce as soon as today that it would be inclined to recommend Aviva's latest offer if the firm chooses to move forwards with the transaction. Direct Line shares closed broadly flat at 236 pence in London on Thursday, giving the company a market value of about £3.1 billion.
Citigroup has named 344 new managing directors, the most in at least 6 years for the Wall Street Bank. The news comes in the midst of a major turnaround effort for the lender's management team after years of lagging returns. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has more.
In a statement, the bank's executive management team said, quote, "This represents one of the largest MD cohorts in our firm's history and once again reflects the global diversity of Citi and the colleagues, communities and clients we serve. The new group includes employees from 29 countries and more than a quarter of them are women." In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Citigroup's announcement comes after rival Barclays announced that 116 employees across the bank have been promoted to managing director, with the largest share of promotions coming from the firm's investment banking division.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. On the markets right now, European stock futures are down 0.3%. This also ahead of the US jobs data that we get. The number to watch for November non-farm payrolls is an increase of 220,000. We are talking a lot about the volatility that we've seen politically in France and in South Korea. The Oats-Bund spread yesterday narrowed to 77 basis points, the lowest in 2 weeks yesterday. So the spread between French and German 10-year yields. As for the Kospi, it did drop as much as 1.8% this morning, but has now pared that decline to some 0.2%, and the won also paring some losses. As for Bitcoin, we were talking earlier in the week about it passing through $100,000, almost $103,000. There was a big plunge yesterday, and we're now trading at about $98,000 for Bitcoin. Oil prices, also after the OPEC meeting yesterday, are steady at $72.12 the barrel. So those are the markets.
Well, in a moment, we're going to talk more about what's happening here in France, Caroline. Plus, we'll be getting the inside story of the Russian hackers who broke into a 158-year-old UK business. But first, I don't know how much of your Christmas shopping you've done. I've done none because I've been here doing this.
But you're in Paris. You're going to have the whole afternoon once you...
Am I?
Perhaps, maybe. But I love this piece that's on the Bloomberg terminal this morning, which is from Bloomberg writer Le Barrett Lily Girma, who's talking about the 2024 gift guide with a focus on craftsmanship, which I really like, keeping centuries of tradition alive and also supporting local enterprises. She's talking about how you can buy all of those artisan products that you might get on a long trip somewhere, lovely and exotic, and how you can get it on your touch screen. She's also named a few places where you can, buy things like Peruvian, Andean knitwear, all sorts of items. That she's got a lovely gift guide for you today.
Yeah, well, give me some ideas of what to buy for Christmas, Caroline.
Yeah, there we are. But, of course, it's the second day that you've been in Paris, where the country does seem to be in political limbo. And, of course, we were watching Emmanuel Macron last night. He sounded to me pretty defiant. He blamed the situation on the far left and the far right. He says that he won't resign. So this morning, what are we thinking about? What now for the political situation in France?
Well, I suppose let's start with the things that we did learn from Emmanuel Macron's speech, was that he's not going to resign, as you said. That's despite we had 2 polls out yesterday afternoon showing a majority of French people did want the president to resign, 59% and 61% in 2 separate polls. So he's staying on until 2027. He says he will name a prime minister in the coming days, and that phrase is important because the last time around, of course, it took months after the election for him to find someone. So the suggestion is that it's going to happen much faster this time around. And then we had a kind of an idea that he wants to create what he's calling a government of general interest. So he wants to unite, it would appear, the centre parties to try and bring them together to form a more stable working majority, or a working minority, at least, in the French Parliament as well. And he has a series of meetings lined up with political leaders this morning, with his own party, with the centrist and centre-right parties that he had been working with under Michel Barnier, but also the Socialist Party on the centre-left. And they're really the key players to watch now, because if they were to sign up or be brought into some sort of, unity government of general interest under a new prime minister, that's what would change from the last situation. That's what could bring a little bit more stability and a greater chance of a budget being passed. Those political leaders will be coming with their shopping lists when they go to the Elysée later.
Yes, absolutely. What happens then to the budget and government spending in the meantime?
So Emmanuel Macron did acknowledge in his speech that he doesn't expect a budget to be passed until early next year. So he's going to bring this special law to Parliament by the middle of December, he said, which will allow essentially the 2024 budget to roll over into 2025. This is the temporary situation we've been talking about for a couple of days now. It keeps government services running, taxes will be collected, benefits will be paid. Schools will open, roads will be cleaned, etc. All those things will continue, but it doesn't solve any of the bigger fiscal problems that France is facing, and we know that they have been keyed in focus.
And Bloomberg also spoke to Marine Le Pen yesterday. She says it's possible to get a budget within weeks.
Possible if you do what she wants is kind of the subtext to that as well. Michel Barnier made a number of concessions to what Marine Le Pen wanted to try and get her to abstain on the budget vote and to pass it through. That wasn't enough for her. Now, she said in her interview with Francine Lacqua that they weren't concessions made by Michel Barnier. She did talk about wanting to get the deficit under control, but said that the goal to bring it to 3% by the end of by 2029 wasn't realistic. That was the way that she was thinking about it anyway. She said that she wanted to target government waste rather than raising taxes. Not a full plan that we got from the leader of the National Rally, but still an interesting insight into how she's thinking about this process, because again, whether or not she's willing to abstain and her party's willing to abstain on the budget vote may prove to be key when we get past the next few steps of finding a prime minister and getting Parliament back to work.
Yes, it is certainly a very interesting, very difficult moment for France. Stephen, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed then today. Also want to turn our attention, though, to another story in the UK today. Ransomware attacks on small and medium-sized businesses in Europe and North America are growing. This according to cybersecurity researchers. And the costs are soaring as gangs target the little guys to extort money. This has been reported by our investigative reporter, part of Bloomberg's cybersecurity team, Ryan Gallagher. Good morning, Ryan. Thanks for being with us. My heart was a little bit broken by the story that you wrote today about this British company called Knights of Old and what happened to them when they were targeted by hackers. Just tell us a bit about that business in particular and what you wrote about them.
Hi there, good morning. Yeah, it's a really sad and actually quite tragic story. Knights of Old was a company founded nearly 160 years ago in 1865 by a man called William Knight in a small town called Old, about 80 miles north of London. And he started as a transport company with literally a horse and cart. And over the years, it grew into a very large logistics company delivering goods across the UK. The company became part of a group called KNP. They had about 900 employees, 7 depots, 400 trucks, and they were delivering for big companies such as Penguin Random House, sending millions of books round the country to Amazon and other retailers where they would then be sold on to customers. And in June last year, this company was the victim of a cyber attack, and their computers were all locked down with a kind of malicious software called ransomware. A hacking gang demanded money from them to unlock their computers. The company didn't want to pay any money to these hackers, and ultimately what happened was they ended up in liquidation. They had to go into administration, and the company no longer exists. So 160 years of history gone just like that.
It's an incredible story. How much do we know about the criminals that are responsible for this attack?
Yeah, well, it's a gang that calls themselves Akira. They're believed to be located in Russia. It's essentially an organized crime group. And what these gangs do is they target predominantly Western companies like Knights of Old, and they hack into their computers, they lock them down, they demand payments. In Akira's case, they have victimized more than, I think it's 350 organizations just in the last year and a half alone. And they've managed to extort an estimated $42 million in payments from these victims. Usually they're paid in cryptocurrency. And the victims are, in like 80% of the cases we looked at, smaller and medium-sized companies. They seem to specifically hunt down the smaller companies because they sadly aren't always as well resourced as the larger companies, and so can't defend themselves. They don't have the cyber tools to fight back, and are maybe more likely to have to be backed into a corner and pay money to get their computers recovered.
Yeah, I mean, smaller businesses, but as you say, Knights of Old, hundreds of employees, would be considered a sort of sizable firm perhaps in the UK. I mean, what can those sorts of businesses, as you say, do to defend against this now?
Yeah, well, in the Knights case, I talked to one of the co-owners of the company, and he now actually is spending his time speaking to other companies and telling them what he wished he'd done. And he tells them, to try and get sophisticated, it's called like intrusion detection or network monitoring tools that can essentially watch what's happening across your company's network and see any anomalous events and try, flag suspicious activity. And, these tools are widely available. They can be quite costly, but the point is that if you don't have them, it can be existential. The damage caused for your business. You can cease to exist if you don't have these tools and sadly become a victim like Knights did. So, yeah, and also having dedicated cyber experts on staff. I mean, some companies just have, broad, generalized IT teams rather than actual cyber experts. It's very different specialism. So, having dedicated teams regularly updating all your software, which is a common thing, but it surprisingly doesn't happen in a lot of companies. So, these are the ways in which a company can strengthen itself against these types of attacks.
What about it's interesting to hear what the owners of this company are doing now, and I wonder if there is sort of a future for them. Is Knights of Old going to be able to revive themselves?
Well, the company's it's been put in administration. It's no longer going to exist. There were three founders of the company, or the three co-owners of the company, who they've sort of gone their separate ways, and they're still working in the transport business and logistics. And Paul Abbott, the co-owner that I talked to, he is actually literally starting from scratch, and he's managed to get the money together to buy one truck. And he says he's just trying to start again. So he's gone from helping to run a fleet of 400 trucks to having one truck with a new business, and he's trying to get himself off the ground again and just start over. These guys say that their lives were essentially ruined by this attack. So it's a really tragic case, but it shows the the risk posed by these gangs. It's really serious and existential for businesses, and something that I think every business owner needs to be looking at very carefully, how they protect themselves from these kinds of attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. Attacks that are growing, as you say. Ryan, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg Radio. Ryan Gallagher is an investigative reporter at Bloomberg's cybersecurity team with his piece that's on the Bloomberg terminal today. Well, Stephen, you're in Paris today. I've got another programming note for our listeners for next week. On Tuesday, we will be live at Bloomberg's inaugural Women, Money and Power event in London, convening the most influential female voices in finance from around the world to debate and discuss consequential themes facing the future of business. We'll be speaking to Anne Walsh, who's managing partner at Guggenheim Partners, Anne Glover, co-founder of Amadeus Capital, Fiona Haythorne, who's the CEO of Women on Boards, and many others. So do hope you'll join us and listen in. Bloomberg's inaugural Women, Money and Power event is live here on Bloomberg Radio on Tuesday, the 10th of December.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.